So Hartshorne, Tenenbaum, and Pinker in 2018 really investigated much more thoroughly how second language learners can, or how much anyway, second language learners can tell us about critical or sensitive periods. And so what they did is outlined right here. They tested several 100,000 subjects of diverse ages and linguistic backgrounds. So here are age of first exposure, which we know seems to be pretty important for second language acquisition, as well as the current age of the speaker, and again the linguistic background, and try to basically use this to disentangle the effect of these different factors. So age of first exposure, which again traditionally seemed to be the thing that matters the most. Age at testing, which also includes how much or how long really you've been speaking the language, and total years of exposure, which is sort of how long you've been speaking the language. But age at testing can also do that depending on when exactly the first age of exposure was. But in case there were any specific age effects, they also looked at that. And so here's sort of a summary, really, of the very interesting things that they found. And so the first is that there's a learning rate shift around 17. So there's good support for the existence of a critical or sensitive period for language acquisition, that when the learning rate declines, when the learning rate stops being so super powered, seems to be around 17, right? Which is much later than we might have thought this kind of, critical or sensitive period extends. So the learning rate is actually pretty good up until 17. And again, there's sort of more detailed plots of this happening, but what you see, if you can disentangle this, is basically this, is around 17 is when you see a big drop off in learning rate, how fast you're able to absorb information. And so the other thing you sort of might naturally be interested in is ultimate attainment, right? What is the level of knowledge that you reach? And here is something they found that's quite interesting. So even native speakers who are able to make full use of the critical or sensitive period take a very long time to reach mature native-like proficiency, right? It doesn't just stop at age 5. It doesn't even just stop at age 12, as we'll see in a moment. It goes on for quite a while. So by implication, someone who started relatively late in this critical or sensitive period is someone who has had limited time to learn at the high rate that this period provides. They would simply run out of time during the super high-powered learning part, right? So after age 17, they kind of lose, again, that super high learning rate. There's a drop-off in that learning rate for whatever reason. And if you've had less time before that to absorb language, you're going to do worse. Okay, so that's sort of this link between ultimate attainment and how the learning rate seems to drop off around age 17. But interestingly enough, it's a little more complicated, as often it is. So they looked at ultimate attainment curves in both immersion learners, right, who are completely immersed in the language, versus non-immersion learners, both of whom types at least had 30 years of experience to assure what they call asymptotic learning. That is learning in the limit, like you're not going to get any better after 30 years, and who were at most 70 years old to avoid age-related decline. And here's what they found, right, which is sort of shown in this graph over here with age of first exposure. We have our monolinguals and our immersion learners, and then our non-immersion learners. And one of the first things that you can see in terms of the accuracy is that it's pretty darn high, actually, right? So up here, your monolinguals are like at 98% accuracy, and your immersion learners kind of drop off, and your non-immersion learners are a little lower, but 98 versus 93, it's actually not that bad, right? So you're actually doing pretty well, right, up until it looks like around this point. And so here's what they see. This is a summary, really, again, what's going on in this graph. Immersion learners showed only a minimal decline in ultimate attainment. So you're measuring against monolinguals, natives, right? They showed only a minimal decline in ultimate attainment until around age 12, till like right there, right? And then you see this kind of drop off. Non-immersion learners showed similar results in terms of the effect on their ultimate attainment. Of course, there's a little drop off in ultimate attainment of about 5% accuracy. Not terrible, but something, right? But from 4 to 9 years, proficiency showed no decline, right? And then after that, after age 10 and after, that's when you start seeing the decline in the non-immersion learners, right? So really, you have not really any major difference in ultimate attainment before age 10. Right? If you're exposed, whether it's an immersion setting or a non-immersion setting, it's not going to affect your ultimate attainment if you're encounter that language before age 10. What's going to matter, of course, you're going to get that drop off between being immersed and non-immersed, and sort of the ultimate attainment you reach. Is it going to be 98%? Is it going to be 93% accuracy? But the fact that you were exposed at, say, age 8 is not going to matter at age 4 versus age 8. Age 4 versus age 8. It's not going to matter, right? So that's quite interesting. That seems to correlate with our ideas of a critical or sensitive period, right? And so this comes back to what I was talking about before, about how long it actually takes your native learners to learn things. We found that native and non-native learners both require around 30 years to reach asymptotic performance, at least in immersion settings, right, which is sort of the most comparative experience you would have for a non-native learner. A native learner, of course, is immersed in it, so a non-native learner who's immersed in it would be equivalent. It still takes 30 years to reach full mature knowledge, which is a really long time, right? And so they found that ultimate attainment, the level of performance, is fairly consistent for learners who begin prior to 10 to 12 years of age. So prior to 10 for our non-immersion, prior to 12 for our immersion. And in terms of the shape of learning period, and actually, rather, this is the shape of the ultimate attainment, right? We see a plateau, right? So equivalent attainment followed by a continuous decline, which seems very much like a sensitive period. So the end of the plateau period, the end of that period, they think must be due to changes in late adolescence rather than childhood, because of the timing of it, right? So again, 17 is when you see the learning rate drop off, but ultimate attainment starts taking a hit after age 12, right? So there's definitely something going on, but it's a continuous decline, right? It's not a sudden drop off. So this is really evidence more for a sensitive period.